Hi, everyone. Welcome to Soul Sense podcast on Samaritan's Well. And today we've got a special guest. Welcome, Stacey Womack. She is an author and national speaker at conferences. She's the executive director of the Abuse Recovery Ministry Services, also known as ARMS. And we're just so happy to have you, Stacey.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so glad to have you from Beaverton, Oregon. We were just talking about Beaverton, Oregon. My son's heading up to Oregon with his wife here in the next few days. It's a beautiful part of the country, huh?
It is. Very beautiful here.
And you grew up there?
I did, yeah. Born and raised Oregonian, and I grew up as a child in Beaverton. I live outside of Beaverton for my adult life, most of my adult life, just not far from Beaverton, but our office is now back in Beaverton, probably about 2 miles from where I grew up.
Well, and Stacey, in addition to being the founder and the director of this ministry, she's got 6 children, 13 grandkids, and a great-grandchild. That's exciting. Tell us a little bit about how God called you into this ministry, because it's very unique. You know, it's a very unique ministry around domestic abuse issues.
It is. I grew up in the church. My father was a pastor, so I grew up in and around ministry. And I married young, and I started having my kids right away, which is, I always say it's funny because I didn't like babysitting before I got married, and so God gave me 6 kids. And I really loved being a mother, and I really felt like it was my call, and I homeschooled them back in the day when that was a new thing.
That's
And
true.
truly felt like it was a calling from God. And in the midst of that, God kind of interrupted a little bit and said, I have ministry for you beyond your family. And basically, you've had all these years to be poured into. It's your turn to pour out. And
Wow.
so I spent a couple of years seeking God on what it was He wanted me to do. And I was getting these broad answers from God. I didn't even tell anybody for a year and a half.
Wow.
And when I did, I told the pastor, and he goes, "You've known for a year and a half and you haven't done anything?" And I went back to God and I said, "God, I've known for a year and a half and I haven't done anything." And God said, "Not yet." And
Okay.
so He had a specific timing. And right before He opened this door, and I have a very crazy story about it, but God was very clear about, you don't get to pick the ministry. I'm going to pick the ministry.
Wow.
So when God brought me into this, I knew very, very little, no more than the average person knew about domestic violence. And so my only goal at the time, Mark, was I was going to try to lead a couple classes to help women through their healing process once I figured out how to do that, having
Sure.
not been a survivor of domestic violence. And that was really my only goal, but God had bigger plans. And it just, after about a year and a half, we incorporated, and 3 months later, we had our nonprofit status, and it was like quadrupling in our recovery program, which is the main program, our largest program, which is national and international. Her Journey. It's a recovery program for women who have experienced abuse that we have translated into Spanish, Russian, German, Kiswahili, and Polish. So
Whoa.
we're actually in 6 countries. And Kenya has their own NGO status there. And all this has been God's doing. It's not been me going, "Oh, let's go here, let's do this."
Right.
It's like I just get up each day and keep doing the ordinary things. And once in a while I look up and I'm like, how did we end up here? But this has been His ministry. And so I'm always very clear about that. I'm not the visionary of the organization. God has always been the visionary. And, when people thank me, it just kind of rolls off my back because I feel like it's really God's, and God deserves the honor, and the success that ARMS has had really comes from Him. So I just get to be I get to be the nanny of this ministry that He birthed.
I love it. I love it. And it really is. It's like, I think when we can get to a place where we can say, okay, we're going to be the stewards, God's the provider of it, but we're going to be the stewards. I think we're probably in a place where we can, really allow God to work. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about how the church has historically struggled to address domestic abuse.
Okay. Yeah. Let me start off with statistically, church is the
Okay.
number one place people go for help for domestic violence, even though they don't have the language for it. so they often don't call it abuse. They might call it anger issues or communication problems. But it's also been known to be the least helpful. And so the
Okay.
secular community has a very negative view of the church's handling of this. And I don't believe it's because people don't care. I believe it's because they're uneducated. And I know that counselors, pastors, social workers only get maybe, if they're lucky, a couple hours of training or a couple chapters in a
Correct.
book, and that's it. And so they're being maybe trained to do some marriage counseling, but not
Hmm.
anything beyond that. When in reality, a lot of those couples are actually dealing with those power and control issues that, or one person is using a pattern of behaviors to manipulate the person to do and be the way they want them to do, be, and think. So I think that also over the years of doing this, that it has a lot to do with the senior pastor and his particular beliefs about male and female roles. So if the
Okay.
stronger his male beliefs are, the less likely he is willing to have an ear to hear what we have to say. I've also had pastors tell me, okay, Stacey, um, I hear what you're saying, but I don't want to open that can of worms
Mm.
because, especially for a smaller church, since those who abuse are really good at going to the church leadership and they are very believable. And if the pastor sometimes sets some boundaries or does some things to protect the victim, he will go around and can cause church division, and that's a scary
Mm.
thing when you're a small church, and I get that.
Sure.
And my comment is, but what would Jesus do? I mean, what would Jesus do in this situation?
Hmm.
So, and I get that it's hard, but I think that, I mean, I've gone to Bible colleges and I've spoken at seminaries, and it's mostly men,
Right.
and you can almost see it in their body language, their lack of. It's almost like, well, that's a women's issue, and while men are the main perpetrators and women are mainly the victims in this, I mean, it can go either way. But
Right.
really, it isn't a women's issue. It's really more of a men's issue if you want to look at it that way. It's
Yes.
1 in 3 women, the stat is 1 in 3 women have experienced domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking by an intimate partner. And those are the illegal forms of abuse. That doesn't even include the forms of abuse that aren't illegal, that are killing our women out there, and some of our men as well. Then we're talking a huge number. So some of our pastors that we've talked to they'll actually say to us, "Oh, that's not happening in my church." But I
Hmm.
can guarantee you, every time I do a training, whether it's with a very small group of people or a large group, there are women who have experienced abuse, and there are men who are using abuse, and there are men who have experienced abuse in childhood or
Hmm.
bullied as a teenager. So they've experienced this and found ways to try to cope with what they've gone through. So it's not being like anti-male. It's actually just being honest about kind of the cultural, uh, looking at things like even like the mass shootings. I mean, it's men doing these things, so we need to talk about male culture and how are men being socialized and all that, and what does it look like to love like Jesus loves, which is something that we focus a lot on in our intervention program for men.
Could you tell us more about, you mentioned the like illegal forms, and you said 1 out of 3 women uh, have experienced some kind of illegal form of abuse, but tell us more about the non-illegal forms
Mhm.
that are still abusive. Let's
Okay,
talk about that if we could.
yeah. So I'll tell you the 8 forms that we talk about in all of our programs. So there's
Okay.
verbal, psychological, physical, financial, sexual, property, spiritual, and animal. And abuse just means the misuse of. So anything can actually be misused. So physical abuse, people would get that as being illegal. Sexual abuse, and we broadly define this, so some of it would be considered illegal and some of it wouldn't be considered illegal. The
Sure.
number one form of abuse used is psychological abuse, or it's
Okay.
often called emotional abuse. And there's more than 55,000 women that we've served have told us this is the worst form of abuse because it's really hard to explain to someone. It sounds like normal marital conflict, but it's really not. And if someone isn't trained to like really listen carefully and really understand that someone's soul is dying from this type of behavior, it gets treated like normal marital conflict, which never works when the issue is parent control. I've had women try up to 15 counselors, and I would too, because no person gets into a relationship to see it end. So
No.
the women that we serve work extremely hard to save their relationships. They try everything from self-help books. They read all the books on how to be the best wife. They go to counseling. They just do all kinds of things, and they may even try everything from being overly compliant to dishing the abuse right back out,
Hmm.
because they're hoping that then he would understand how it makes her feel, and then he would want to stop that behavior. But when a woman, since it's about power and control, if a woman increases her level of power, then he has to increase it further, so it actually makes it more dangerous for her. So if he's a power and control person, it's about power and control. You're having a fight. She's she's doing things that she shouldn't do, which we would consider abusive, like yelling and calling names, and she throws a vase. And I had a
Hmm.
gal do this, a little 100-pound gal, and her
Sure.
husband's 200 pounds, 6 foot tall, and so since she raised the bar of control, he had to raise it even higher, so he throws the TV.
Oh.
So it actually creates more danger for her to do that type of behavior. But women do try all kinds of ways to try to stop it. And sometimes when you're in it long enough, you end up picking up some of those same tools on how to handle conflict. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of good examples much anymore, even because we're getting the next generation through the door. And there's even more dysfunction and a lot more mental health than we've ever seen before. So it makes our job harder, especially in working with our intervention clients.
Stacey, you used that phrase power and control several times. How much of the abuse in those 8 categories comes down to either broadly manipulation by the abuser or intimidation?
Whether it's intimidation or manipulation, it's still abuse. Okay, and we all like to have things our way. Okay,
Right?
when I talk to a celebrate recovery group maybe, and it's a mixed group of men and women, I always start off with, how many of you like to have things your way?
Sure.
Because the reality is we're all a little selfish, we're all a little self-centered,
Hmm.
and but God has given us the right to have personal power, and that's what we are responsible for, and that's what we are going to stand before God and give an account for. God never intended in a relationship for one person to have power over the other. It was meant to be more of the model of the Trinity in an earthly manner, that the husband, wife, and God work together in unity, where it's not a hierarchy as much as it is a consensus where you work together to make the best decision for all. So it's not about winning or losing, but with someone who has an abusive personality, someone who's practicing abuse on a regular basis, and again, a pattern is really what defines that, a pattern of behaviors that are ongoing. Um, it's never about being mutual. It's always about winning and being right. So even our men would say, Stacey, I was having a fight with my wife, and partway through I realized she was right, but I couldn't let her win. So I kept arguing until she conceded, because they had to win.
That's classic.
Yeah.
I have to win because, like, one of the things that I teach my clients is God has given you a gift of a yes and a no. And every person has this, right? When we look at this in James 5, it says, but above all, dot, 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 let your yes be yes and your no be no. And to me, one of the emphasis there is that it's your yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
It's not someone else's. So a lot of what we're talking about is when I say, oh, you don't get to have a yes or no, only I get to have that in the relationship.
Right. Right.
Is that a lot of what we're talking about?
Yeah, we really, in our men's intervention program where we're working with men who use abusive behaviors, we do this in our women's too, but it's a little bit different. But especially in our men's program, really what we're doing is discipling them in, how do you love like Jesus loves? I mean, we have all this Christian language. So I
Sure.
had a guy just recently, he answered a question with a very religious answer, and I said, okay. That's correct, but what does that look like? So, well, I just need to be more Christ-like. Well, what does that mean? Well,
Hmm.
it means I'm going to be kind, but what does that mean? I mean, in practical application, I mean, in when laying down your life and putting the other person first, laying down what you want to bless the other person, when it comes to that last piece of chocolate cake in the fridge that you really want, it's we get it down to the nitty gritty because I mean we've had guys who have been court mandated, and we work with court mandated and voluntary clients who are there
Hmm.
because they fought over how to fill a dishwasher.
Oh,
So and then something happened, and police were called, and they were required to go through a program. So
sure.
so we really talk about this, and these classes are male female co-facilitated. My husband and I co-facilitate a national virtual ones. We just started that so we can
Hmm.
serve all of our Her Journey groups nationally. We've had a lot of men calling saying, "Hey, do you have something that I can go to?" If there's nothing in their area, or can't take voluntary clients, then we do that. And doing it virtually isn't the best way, but at least we can serve
No.
them. And my husband and I have 24 years of experience in leading these groups.
Right.
And they're led together, and they're male female co-facilitated because we're modeling shared power. I'm the feminine perspective and the voice of the victim, and and we get to show them and model them for them during that time how we can work together as a team. So we have other facilitators too. It's very different when it's your husband and wife because they're watching us like a hawk, everything, our facial expressions and everything.
I'm sure they are.
So, but it really is so wonderful. I mean, it's like watching the guys begin to grasp it. And there's a lot of highs and lows in the process. It's a hard program. It takes about a year to complete,
Oh,
and it's
wow. 1 year.
highly accountable. So it's hard because every week they have to share a past event they didn't handle well, and what types of abuse were in it. And we talk about
Hmm.
things that are very obvious to things that aren't as obvious. So, for instance, you might not think of this, but sarcasm is a form of verbal abuse.
Yes.
Sarcasm actually means the tearing of flesh.
Yes.
So there's always a little bit of truth to it, but it's always at someone's expense. So we talk about how we're a very sarcastic culture.
Hmm.
All
Hmm.
sitcoms are are based on sarcasm, but
True.
it's not always abusive, but most of the time it is. And my husband and I decided early on that we weren't going to do that to one another because it was unkind. But I tend to be more sarcastic than him. So when we're in a group of people, I might try to be funny and say a joke at his expense, and then I look across the room and I kind of lip to him, "I'm sorry," because I know I stepped over that line that we had agreed not to step over. Not to put one another down.
One of my favorite verses for, oh, I was just joking. You're sarcastic or you're cutting, and then you say, I was just joking. I love this verse. It's from the New Living Translation, Proverbs 26:18. Now, get the context. Just as damaging as a madman shooting a deadly weapon is someone who lies to a friend and then says, I was only joking.
Yep.
See, I grew up with a real sarcastic tongue. Unfortunately, my mentor, who I loved so much, he taught me to be real sarcastic and cutting, and I was very good at it. And then one day in college, I just cut down my roommate, and his friend Paco was in the room, a graduate student with little wiry glasses. And he stopped me and he said, Mark, you use sarcasm like a knife, and it hurts people.
Yeah.
And that just cut to my heart.
Yeah.
And I went to God and I said, Lord, I surrender my tongue because James 3 says
Hmm.
no man can tame his own tongue.
Right.
So we have to surrender it to God. And
Absolutely.
I cut that sarcasm out before I even met my wife. Thank God.
Yeah. We both my husband and I have done it, and but we caught it early, and
Yes.
we've kind of made that commitment not to do that because it slices and dices. And but again, a lot of our clients will say, well, yes, my work culture, everybody does that, especially the
Hmm.
guys in there. If they're in a work culture, all
Sure.
the guys just do that constantly. And it's
Sure.
like, but you can choose to step outside of that,
You can.
you know.
You can. And
and be
so
the
tell
change
us a
agent.
little more. Tell us a little more about the program and the process, because that's fascinating to me that you take these men through this 1 year program, whether it's done online or in person.
Mm.
Yeah, tell us more about it, because that's just fascinating to me, that discipleship program.
Sure. And again, we're meeting the state standards. We started before there were any state standards when it was
Okay.
a newer thing to do because we'd started with our women, doing our recovery work for women of faith, and we thought, well, gosh, we're doing this. I thought, how do we help the men who are using these behaviors? Because a lot of
Right.
times, when their first class would go through the types of abuse very in detail, and
Okay.
they're like, oh, I didn't realize that was abusive. So they sometimes are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I don't want to do that again. I didn't realize that was abuse, and but knowledge doesn't equal change. So that's why the program
No.
takes so long. We have to work on the belief systems behind what is giving them permission to behave the way they're behaving so that they can shift them to Christ-like beliefs so that then their behaviors will line up with those beliefs because everything we do is based out of whatever we believe to be true. So you can
Mm-hmm.
tell me something, but if your behavior is something different, then it's not true. So a lot of men will say, "Oh, I believe in equality or whatever," but their behavior shows that they do not.
Right.
Yeah. So we have all kinds of lessons that we teach. So the state requires that we cover certain topics, but as
Mm-hmm.
a faith-based organization, and it's interesting, Mark, that here we are just outside of Portland. We're in a very liberal area, one of the most
Sure.
unchurched states in the union, and yet we are an approved provider in Oregon,
That's
and
amazing.
we receive referrals, and when the guys are really allowed to pick, and so sometimes, actually, a lot of our guys and gals, because we work with women who are abusive too, they're
Sure.
not necessarily walking with God, but sometimes we're maybe a little bit cheaper, or they think we're going to be easier when really we probably are the most highly accountable group that they could go to.
I'll bet you
And
are.
at first they don't like it. It's super uncomfortable. And I tell them, I said, be prepared. At first, you're going to feel really crappy your first few weeks, but hang in there because you're going to find it as you begin to do the things and practice the things that we're going to teach you. You're going to begin seeing results. And that's what, we're only 6 weeks in with our new Zoom class. And the guys are like, I'm finding that this stuff is working.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
And they know they have a long way to go, but
Right.
they're working on actually listening and understanding and validating their wife's feelings and then being able to not take it as an attack, not take it
Mm-hmm.
as a put down, but as she's trying to help our relationship, even though she's doing it inappropriately. So
Sure.
we talk about the need to be accountable for ourselves. So it would be easy, Mark, for let's say you come to me and you say, Stacey, when you did this, this really offended me. And it'd
Right.
be so easy for me to go, oh, sorry, Mark. Oh gosh, I was just having a really bad day. I was just
Sure.
really tired that day. That is a non-accountable way to apologize.
That's true.
The right way to do it is like, I'm so sorry, Mark, that hurt you.
Yep.
Period.
Yeah. That wounded you.
Yeah, I can see how that would hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just and
Absolutely.
honor how they feel because feelings are just feelings. And you don't have a right to tell somebody how they feel or should feel or
Right.
whatever. And yet, those who use abusive behaviors commonly do that. Well, you don't feel that way. That's not what you
Right.
think.
They turn the tables,
Yeah,
right?
and they want to
You
redefine
shouldn't
them.
feel that way. You shouldn't be so
Yeah,
upset. You're
and
just emotional. You're just all emotional on me.
so, and in her journey, our recovery program, we're talking about them regaining their sense of value and their sense of self because in abusive relationships, when you get married, you adapt for the other person, but in an abusive relationship, they keep adapting to the point where they lose their sense of identity. So
Yeah.
while they're with us, we want them to not just know, but believe that God loves them, that they have
Hmm.
value, and because they have it's appropriate and right for them to set boundaries. And yet they're being told by their abuser and sometimes by their pastors that they are being unsubmissive, that they are, they're out of line, that they're too sensitive, that they're overreacting, and it's really hard then to hold those boundaries unless you have a group around you that is supporting you in standing up for your value and saying God loves me, and because of that, I need to set this boundary and be safe.
That's so good, Stacey. That is so good. And I know that one of the things that happens over time is, let's say, that abused partner, typically the wife, sometimes the husband, but that abused partner, they can get all kinds of confusing thoughts in their mind. Oh, if I would just try harder. And like you said, they try different things. They try to twist themselves into a pretzel, to do what the other one wants. Or then sometimes they get upset and they throw something at them, and then they get the TV thrown back, God forbid. But I mean, if we look at from a secular perspective, I've done several levels of training in
Yep.
Gottman therapy.
Yep.
And one of the big things with Gottman, up in your part of the country, by the way, he's up in
Yep.
Washington,
Yeah.
but that one of the keys for a healthy relationship is accepting influence from each other. If you can get to a place of that shared influence, then you're probably, a lot of that abuse is going to go out the window, because it's going to demand that I
So,
listen, that I take in your ideas, and I'm respectful in our conversations.
which is that consensus I was talking about, and
Hmm.
I had to go through leadership training when I first started because I didn't know anything about running businesses.
Sure.
And so they were teaching us all these leadership styles, but consensus is really what it's about. It's like you listen to one another and you listen to your reasons behind, and then you decide together what's best for all. There's times that I'll say to my husband, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, let's do it that way. And there's times that he'll say, okay, I see what you're saying. Let's do it this way. There's a whole bunch of times it really doesn't matter that we
Sure.
do this all day long. What do you want to have for dinner? What do you want, all
Sure.
kinds of times that we are doing this deferring to one another,
Hmm.
which is another word
Hmm.
for submitting,
Hmm.
because it just
Hmm.
means that you're giving up your way for the benefit of all. That's what it was
Yeah.
intended for, in a very healthy way. And so, but it gets misused when people say, you have to. The Bible says you have to, and you have to do what I say, and
Right.
that doesn't go over well because that's not what God's design was. I don't see I don't see the Trinity ever having arguments over how are we going to make the earth and the universe, and
Yeah.
they worked in total unity, and I really believe that God meant for us to do that. And I wanted to make one comment about people trying to, the women especially, trying to change themselves to the point where they don't know who they are. We had one
Right.
woman whose attorney told her, if you could walk on water, he'd complain that you splashed. So
I've never heard that one.
you can be Jesus perfect, but with someone whose mindset is to gain power and control, it won't matter what you do, no matter how perfect you are, they will find fault.
Well, and I'm thinking back, Stacy, to what you'd said earlier. I forget the phrase exactly, but you said knowledge doesn't mean change, I
Right.
think, right?
Yep.
And so we get knowledge in our heads, but we understand from scripture that we live from our hearts.
Right.
So it's going to have to get from our heads to our hearts to make a
Absolutely.
change,
Absolutely. And
right?
I actually find our men who are the most religious know their Bibles upside down and backwards. I can quote it, but I tell you, they are sometimes the most rigid, the most
Yes.
unkind, very, very much like a Pharisee would be. It's like
Hmm.
they know what the Bible says, but they do not know how to live it. And
Yes.
God talks about, you can give your life up to and be burned at the stake, and it will gain you
Hmm.
nothing without love, right?
Without
Because
love.
everything that God says in His Word is always coming from a place of love, not a place of you need to do it my way. You need
Yes.
to get my way. It's always been you have a choice. Here's the options, And so I set before you blessing, cursing, life and death. Therefore, choose life. God
That's so
always is
good.
giving us options. He's not telling us what to do. He's not forcing us to do this. He is just saying, "I love you. Please choose this way. And if you don't, this is the consequence."
Well, and Stacy, we talk about, I love this story, but I won't tell the whole story of Josh McDowell going on a search for a year for the definition of love. But at the end of the year, he's expressing his frustration to his father-in-law at the Thanksgiving table. I've asked all these theological professors and presidents and pastors, what's the definition of love? And they keep saying 1 Corinthians 13, and he tells them, no, that's the love chapter. That's a description. It's not a definition. And his father-in-law turns to him kind of incredulous and goes, son, the definition of love is in the very next verse in Ephesians 5. No man ever yet hated himself, but nourishes and cherishes himself.
Mhm.
So to me, if you're not nourishing and cherishing your wife, you're not loving her. And
Absolutely.
all of these areas of abuse are the opposite of nourishing, which
Yeah,
is some kind of providing, or
right,
cherishing, which is some kind of protecting.
right. Absolutely. Because that word love, in where it says love your wife like Christ loved the church, it actually means to nourish, to rear up to maturity, to warm, to brood, to foster. And if a man is doing that, he's caring about making sure his wife's needs are being met and that she's feeling loved and cared for and safe. That's it takes away any of those so much of the conflict that goes on, because a lot of times women just want to be heard and understood and valued. Men want to be respected, women want to be heard and understood and valued. And so
Sure.
I work really hard to help the men just listen, stop and listen. And when I'm working with women who use abusive behaviors, because they use a lot of verbal abuse, because they're not as strong as men.
Hmm.
Um, I will tell them the first thing I want you to do is just work on keeping your mouth shut, because
Oh,
the Bible says even the fools consider wise if they keep silent. So if you can start just by being quiet, and help you to begin slowing it down, because we're using a cognitive behavioral therapy approach,
sure.
but we're using a biblical way of doing that. And so scriptures are intertwined. It's not a Bible study, but we're talking about the practical application of God's word. And again, to many men and women who aren't necessarily following God. So we have this all this time to plant these seeds, because God told me, he said, Stacey, you're not the one who gets to measure success in this program. And I'm like, yeah, but
Wow.
everybody is wanting to know what success is. And he says, you get to plant seeds. And
Wow.
sometimes we see people come back to Christ. I always feel like every person who comes in, male or female, to our program, someone has been praying for them, a father, grandmother, a
Oh,
grandfather. They're here because God is giving them another opportunity. I just did an intake with a woman yesterday, and she goes, my mom and grandma are so excited about me coming
oh,
here.
oh,
But,
that's so
but she
good.
has not been back to church since she was like a teenager.
Wow.
So, and so we get this opportunity to pour into them. And shepherding is like one of my strongest skills, and God just has allowed me to use that. It fills my cup to be in groups and help these people in their walk with Christ, and moving forward. And that's just a really exciting thing to get to do. And
That's so
I feel really
beautiful.
honored to have that opportunity. And
It's
yeah,
so beautiful.
yeah,
Stacy, you mentioned there an example of a woman being abusive. So it's not necessarily 100% men
hmm,
that are doing these abusive
right,
things. Could you tell us about some of the dynamics if a
sure.
wife is being abusive to her husband?
Yeah. So we talk about abuse. You've got victims, those who are experiencing the abuse. And
Hmm.
I know the secular community doesn't like the word victim, but legally that is the term you use. They like
Victim. Yeah.
survivor, and I tell the women when we're taking them through this, and I'm sorry, I'm a little caveat here, but you're survive, you get out of it, you survived it. But God has not called us to survive life; He's called us to live life abundantly, to be overcomers.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
but in relationships, what we see is sometimes there's some mutual abuse going on. I don't know, mutual isn't a good word.
Hmm.
They're both using abusive behaviors, but usually
Hmm.
there's one person is a primary aggressor and the other person is a secondary aggressor. The primary aggressor is the person using abusive behaviors and gaining power and control. The secondary aggressor is using abusive behaviors and usually only getting a little bit of payback. So more of our women sit in that category.
Sure.
So we have to deal with them a little bit differently. Um, so I've seen both secondary aggressors in our men's program and in our women's program. Primary
Okay.
aggressors, I've seen a few of our women being primary aggressors, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't work as well because something has to give you kind of that leg up. Whether you are bigger and stronger, whether you're the one who has the education, you make more money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe the other person doesn't have, has some, or in the immigration status, they're working on that. The other person's
Sure.
American,
Sure.
something or maybe one person has some mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something that gives the other person power over.
Sure.
So what I've seen with some of the men who have been true victims of abuse, and I say that because perpetrators always see themselves as victims. So
Sure.
we don't offer
Yep.
a men's uh, victim group because I would get a room full of perpetrators. What we do is we talk to
Sure.
them on the phone and we refer out to counselors that we trust.
Sure.
Because it's very hard to get a group of men together because, as you mentioned before we started, there's some shame in that. How is
There
a
is.
man abused, in a relationship when he is physically stronger than she is? So how does that happen? And a lot of
Sure.
times it comes from his own upbringing. Maybe he was abused as a child. A lot of men choose the path of being the aggressor because that's a more powerful road to go. And some of our women, that's why they become aggressors, is because they grew up watching the abuse happen and they think that's not
Mm-hmm.
going to happen to me. So they become fighters. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't matter if you're a primary aggressor or a secondary aggressor or you're just using abuse once in a while like we all do.
Mm-hmm.
It's sin. And
Yes, it
so
is.
so we're going to address it that way, and we're going to, it's such a relational class on, it doesn't just help them with intimate partners, it helps them in all their relationships with their children, with their coworkers, with their family, with their
It's good.
friends. And so our all men, male and female clients are really grateful for that. And I think it takes a lot of courage. And what's interesting about male victims is they talk and behave very similar to our female victims.
Wow.
Secondary aggressors, male or female, they say and do very similar things.
Wow.
Primary aggressors, male or female, they say and do very similar things.
Interesting.
And that has been, for me, being a part of the secondary community, because I've led councils, been on co-chairs on councils and over the years in multiple counties here. But there's a lot in Portland of same-sex relationships, and it's like then you
Mm-hmm.
have to take out the male-female dynamic, and you have to really look at who has
That's
the
true.
power in the relationship. And so that helped me
Mm-hmm.
to kind of like just figure that out. So when I do trainings, I'll tell pastors this story. This man has promised his wife that he's going to do this job, and it's Sunday to get home from church, and he turns on football, and she's frustrated because he promised he'd take care of this task, and she's been asking for a while now, and so she comes out and she calls him a name and she tells him he's lazy and hits him in the back of the head, and he
Mm-hmm.
does nothing. And she walks out of the
Mm-hmm.
room. She goes back in the kitchen. She ruminates on it. She comes back out. She does it all again. That would be verbal abuse. It would be physical abuse. It would be psychological abuse.
Sure.
So the third time she comes out. He's decided he's had enough. So he gets up and he gives her a good shove, and she falls on the ground. He can see the fear in her face. And I asked pastors. I said, "Who had the power the entire time?" And I'm not excusing her behavior at all, but the
Sure.
reality is he knew at any point. She also knew at any point he could overpower her.
True.
And so it does not justify the behavior that she used at all. But you have to kind of look at it from a lens of, because a lot of times these guys they'll go into counseling and they'll be very calm. And
Sure.
she is mad and she's loud and she's in the church, she's making noise, rattling the cage,
Mm-hmm.
going, "Why aren't you doing something about this?" And
Mm-hmm.
the church will decide she's the abusive one because look how calm he is and he's so
Right.
nice.
Right.
And she's being so aggressive and so loud, and they'll decide she's the one with the problem. And
Sure.
not all women do that, but there's those women who are so frustrated with not being heard that
Yes.
they go in there and they don't handle it well. They sometimes don't actually represent arms well. Sometimes it's like we educate them around what abuse is, and then they go in and they want to say that you need to know. And I'm like, okay, why don't you just introduce us to them and let us go in and talk to them about this a little bit? And pastors do not need to know everything, but they need to know enough and they
Yes.
need to know what's in their community, what's available in their community, so that they can send them out. And, you know, being a pastor's daughter, my dad used to say, you know, people would always come up and say, oh, we need to be doing this and we need to be doing that. And my dad would say, sounds like God's calling you to that. And
Right.
and I think that it's wrong for people to assume that pastors can do it all, and they can't. And so having an organization, a para church organization like ours, that can come alongside you and say, you know what, send that woman to us. We'll work with her.
That's
We'll
so
work with
good.
her, and then as she works on things, then we might have opportunity for where she begins setting boundaries, and he might come to us and say, because she's going, hey, this isn't going to work unless you get some help. And so he comes to group begrudgingly, but he
Hmm.
comes and he gets the help that he needs. And we have relationships that make it. We just had a guy. We just had our annual banquet, and a man who I've asked to join this new group because he's accountable. He completed a couple years ago. Him and his wife were separated for 2 years while they were going through this process.
Wow. Wow.
And this was during COVID. And he went through it, and they're together. They're doing well. And she came up to me after the banquet because I invited them to the banquet. And she goes, I just wanted to say thank you for saving our marriage. And she hugs him and she goes, he's my
Wow.
best friend.
Oh,
And, you know, and that, I mean, that just blesses my heart. I mean, you know, some churches they've been told by abusive men who've come to our program and who weren't happy with us. And they go back and they say, well, ARMS isn't biblically based. I'm really concerned for them. And the
oh,
churches
yeah.
don't even call us. They just assume that we're promoting divorce, which is not
Right.
our heart. Our heart is to help
Right.
people to have healthy relationships, but we have to work with the individuals separately.
Right.
And then if they're both willing to do the work they need to do, there's opportunity. This is not a situation where couples counseling is appropriate. You're putting her in
Hmm.
danger when you
Hmm.
do that.
Hmm.
And I've had
Stacy,
women try a lot
I'm
of
sorry,
different
go ahead.
counselors. I'm just gonna say, I've maybe already mentioned I've had women try as many as 15 counselors.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I remember back in the 90s when I first got some understanding of this, especially from an experienced couple. I used to get these case studies every month or so of couples that or people they were working with. And they told this story of a young wife that was being came in to see them, and she was getting some physical abuse on average about once a month. So they knew they had to work with her to build her strength up and her identity up. And after a certain amount of time, she agreed to go tell her husband, if you hit me again, I'm going to call the police. And of course, his response was typical. They were in the honeymoon phase. No, I'll never do that again. I'm over that and all that kind of stuff. And of course, it happened again. And she was able to call the police. Now,
Right.
back in those days, and sometimes you'll see it now, he got out pretty quickly and
Yep.
he begged forgiveness and they go into the honeymoon phase. But now they're working with her to go the second phase. The second phase is if you hit me again, I'm calling the police and changing the locks, and you're not coming back until something really changes.
Right.
Oh, no, I'll never do it again. I'll never do it again. But of course, he does it again because he's gotten no help.
Hmm.
And now the police take it a little more seriously. She changes the locks, and then he finally goes for help.
Right.
How typical is something like that where you have to help strengthen and give a safe place for that victim to get help?
Uh, it absolutely has to be paramount. So studies show that if women get 12 hours of victim advocacy, they will set boundaries and even end the relationship if he's unwilling to get the help that he needs. That's not
Wow.
what she wants. She really wants him to change. She really wants him to
Yes.
make it to the other side. She doesn't want the relationship to end. She just wants the abuse to end.
Sure.
And yet, so it's very rare for us to get a man who calls us up and says, I just recognize that I'm being abusive and I need to get some
Hmm.
help. Almost
Yes.
all of them has to be an external pressure to get them there. And so that's why we work with the women about setting boundaries. And honestly, Mark, sometimes it's not safe for her to say, if you do this again, this is going to,
Yep.
sometimes all they can do is actually leave him a letter and go
Yep.
and safety
Go
plan,
be somewhere safe.
go someplace safe
Yeah. Go be somewhere
because
safe.
when she does leave, it's actually the most dangerous time for a woman because he's just lost control. So the ultimate form
Okay.
of control is death. And
Okay.
so 75% of all homicides happen after a separation.
Wow.
Yeah,
75%.
75%. The next most dangerous time for the women is when a divorce is finalized.
Okay.
So safety planning is, and we train, we do virtual trainings to train people to lead our women's recovery groups. We also work with the Citygate Network, which is the hub for all the National Union Gospel Rescue Missions, and CareNet and Heartbeat International, which are both huge pregnancy hubs. So a lot of pregnancy centers that we work with, and then just individuals who call and want to make a difference. And so we train them on how to do the work that we do, mostly our victim recovery program. The other one should be done in, probably more in a center where they already have them there, like a Union Gospel Rescue Mission, where they're in there for a long program.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
So
anyways,
this really is a life and death thing that we're talking about.
it is.
And that's a lot to navigate, isn't it, Stacey?
It is, and I think that when we think about domestic violence, we always just pretty much think about physical abuse, but the reality is that women are dying a very slow death. In fact, tens of
Yeah.
thousands of women are dying a slow death, and their health is deteriorating, and they've done studies on this. So, your body, when you're in trauma, your hippocampus or your cortisol is rushing through your system.
Mhm.
It was what God created in us to be able to run away from that saber-toothed tiger. But
Yes.
we weren't meant to be in a state of trauma and stress like
No.
that all the time. So when it's going through your system, it's actually eating away at your organs from the inside out. And so your hippocampus goes into action to counteract that, but it can't keep up. And so women are having all these health issues, and the longer they're in the abuse, the more severe and the more long lasting they are. But I've seen women as old as 80 get out of an
Mhm.
abusive relationship who were almost 100% wheelchair bound. And then I saw them like a year later, and they're up and walking, they're gardening, and they just look great, just because they're no longer under that stress that they were under.
Stacey, one of my most profound cases happened probably 15 years ago or so. I had a woman that had come in that had been under tremendous psychological abuse for many, many years. And she had finally made the break, separated, moved out of the house. But what shocked her, and which I had to kind of understand too, is that after she moved out, she just collapsed emotionally.
Hmm.
And I think it's what you said. She had been under so much stress for so long, and now she could breathe and she was in a safe place. And it took months of very delicate work
Yes.
to build her back up and to
Hmm.
get her back to that place of
Right.
self confidence. And I
Yeah.
remember I was thinking to myself, it's almost like I could blow her over with a
Right.
poof, a
Right.
puff, you know?
Yeah.
But over those months, she grieved, she strengthened, and within about 4 months, she was just a different person.
Yeah, and I think the group setting, and we have a lot of counselors that love sending their women to us because we're not a process group. It's really about hearing God's heart around the issue, and we
Yeah.
talk about all kinds of different things like depression, and we go through all the like the 101 DD stuff on types of abuse, the cycle of abuse. But we talk about anger, we talk about boundary setting, we talk about forgiveness, we talk about submission versus oppression. We cover all these different topics, and it's really just them listening to us talk. They can ask questions and interject, and then we
Sure.
spend the second half just taking prayer requests and praying, so that when they are sharing their hard things that they're going through, there's a positive outcome. Otherwise, you go to a group, you're sharing all the bad things that are going on, you're kicking up everybody's PTSD, they're going home and having
Hmm.
nightmares, and all you're doing is treading water. You're not making any progress.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just need a new way to think. And so our counselors, like, they know that we're so trauma informed. Before trauma informed was even a thing, God
Hmm.
had designed the program already in a trauma informed way. The women can call us; they don't have to give us their name.
So good.
They can start immediately. There's no cost. They don't have to talk. They can give us a false name. They can bring a female friend with them. They can just stay, go through as many times as they want to. And we are so committed to keeping it free. That's been one of the things that
This
I
is
was told in
so
the
good.
beginning, that there's no way you're going to be able to sustain that. But here we are 28 years later,
That is
and
so
have it
wonderful.
nationally and international, and offering it for free of charge to any woman who is in abuse or has experienced abuse. We mainly focus on intimate relationships, but it's good for anybody who's even just grown up in it.
That's so good, Stacey. We're so thankful that you are running this program and it's having so much influence. Could you share a little bit about how we can reach ARMS? It's the Abuse Recovery Ministry Service. I know you have a website, but what's the
Right.
best way to reach you? And you've written a book called "On the Front Lines of Abuse: Strategies for the Faith Community."
Yeah.
I want to read that book. I have not read it, but I want to read that book.
Yeah. Pastors love that book because it's only 100 pages long.
There you go. Oh, yes.
It's meant to help those who knew nothing about it, like me when I stepped into it. And also say, so if you're experiencing this, this is what you can do. If you're using abuse,
Mm-hmm.
this is what you can do. If you're a faith leader, or church pastor, or counselor, whatever, here's some things you can do. Here's how to do an appropriate separation in these situations.
Mm-hmm.
Because that oftentimes that's the only way you can create safety for the victim. So our website is called abuserecovery.org. So it's easy,
Okay.
abuserecovery.org. And there's a ton, probably way too much information on there. But the book is listed on there. They can just click on it and it will take them to where it is on Amazon. Um, and we have all kinds of like free PDF downloads, things for pastors, and then we're just here to serve the community. So if the community is listening to this and they say, hey, we want some training, even if we have to do it virtually, we'll do that for you. We'll take you through some trainings. We also have some videos on there that you can basically rent that are really inexpensive,
Oh,
that were
wonderful.
made and are being used in a program called Bright Course.
Okay.
Mostly pregnancy centers use it, and we're like the second most watched program they have out of 300 options.
Whoa, that's
Because
really cool. Oh
yeah,
my
so
goodness.
90% of women walking into pregnancy centers have or are experiencing abuse. 90%.
Oh, I believe that. Wow.
So
Stacey, thank you so much for being on today. So glad we could reach you from Beaverton, Oregon, and just keep up the good work. Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please do us a favor and like, subscribe, and share with others who might need it. And you can find additional resources at SamaritansWell.com.